And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this seminar. This seminar is on parliaments and social media, and we're going to focus on Brazil, the reality in Brazil, not just the national parliament, the national congress, but also the legislatures, the state legislatures. And we've got two excellent speakers here to talk to us about this, focusing on very recent research, in fact, research which is still ongoing, and to bring their reflections on how parliaments can utilize social media for public engagement, but also some of the challenges associated with that. So before I introduce our speakers and we get started with the seminar, just a few housekeeping rules. So the seminar has translation into French. So if you want to hear the seminar in French, then you can click on the translation button at the bottom of your screen, where there's like a globe. That's a translation. I would advise you to click on it anyway, even if so that the seminar will be presented in English, in the English language, but there could be someone asking a question in French. So if you want to hear everything in English, I would advise you to click on English at that globe where the translation button is. And throughout the seminar, unless you're speaking, please keep your mics muted, but you're very welcome to keep your cameras on. It's really nice to see people's faces. So if your internet connection allows you, please keep those on. So moving on our topic, as I said, our topic is going to focus on an exploration of social media and parliaments, and how parliaments use social media and how can that be used for actual public engagement. So not necessarily just disseminating information, that's some of the reflections we're going to have, but actually for meaningful engagement and some of the challenges that parliaments as institutions face. So we know a lot about how individual candidates, politicians, MPs use social media, but this is about parliaments as public institutions, which is not exactly the same as individuals. And as I say, we've got two great speakers who I'm really, really pleased to welcome here. So we've got Isabel Mitoso, who's an assistant professor of politics at the Department of Political Science at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And she's also the leader of the research group on democracy, communication, and digital engagement, called, a great name actually, by the way, Isabel, Decode. Love it. And together with Isabel, we've got Thales, so Thales Quintão, who's a research fellow at postdoctoral level in the same Department of Political Science at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. And so in terms of the structure of the seminar, we're going to have an in-conversation format. That means that I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask Isabel and Thales. And then, so there's not going to be a presentation of PowerPoint as such, it's going to be more of a conversation. And our conversation will be just about 25 minutes, half an hour, and then we'll open up for Q&A for you all to ask questions. In the meanwhile, if you do want to ask questions, I will keep an eye on the chat. And so if those chat questions are related to what we're talking about, then I might bring those in at a time. So if you do have some burning questions, please do put them in the chat. And then in any case, in about half an hour, we'll open up for Q&A to everyone. So I hope that's all clear and that works with everyone. Great. I'm seeing some nodding faces, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience too, like Alison and Rodolfo and Claire. I'm sure I saw Claire Mullen from the UK there too. Right, let's start from an overall point of view, which is always a good way to start, and then go into more specifics. And I'll start with you, Isabel, if that's okay. So Isabel, can you say overall, how would you assess, how you evaluate the way social media is used in Brazil and the extent to which this facilitates public engagement? Because just the fact that it's being used, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's facilitating public engagement, does it? So how do you evaluate it overall?
Thank you very much, Christina, for the kind presentation. It's very nice. Sorry, it's very nice to see you here. It's always a pleasure to participate in the seminars. And thank you, Christina. I want to thank you, Cristiane Bernardes, too, who's not here today, but who arranged this conversation at some point, and our colleagues from IPEN, like Fiona, who organizes this very well every time, and the IPU in the person of Andy Richardson. So thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. So let's start. I'll start by a little piece of history in Brazil. I promise it's just 2 sentences, and then I'll go straight to the point. Well, I should give you some context about a very specific case in Brazil and how we were characterized from the beginning. When the first Portuguese men arrived here, one of them wrote a letter to the King of Portugal, in which he said, "In this land, anything we plant will succeed." That's a free translation. In Portuguese is way more poetic than that. I think he would be impressed about how correct he was, not only concerning plant seeds, but especially if he could see us more than 500 years later, and our relationship with digital technologies, specifically social media. Yes, somebody planted social media here and it succeeded. Since the development and the popularization of smartphones and internet connection in the beginning of the 2000s, Brazil is one of the countries in which people have been using the most those media in a daily basis. I don't know if you remember Orkut, one of the first social networking sites that arrived here in 2004, achieved 20 million Brazilian users in its first year in the country. It's a lot, because at that time when Orkut asked people to invite other people, so you could make part of it only if you were invited to another user, and people didn't have smartphones in the country yet. So that's a huge number. And when Orkut was shut down 10 years later in 2014, half of the accounts in that platform were from Brazil. So nowadays we have more than 116 million of Facebook users, which is about 66% of the population over 13 years old. Even though this media is becoming less attractive, I mean, to younger generations. And it's important to mention that Facebook was an important mechanism for the calls to the big 2013 street protests in the country between June and July of that year, when people were sharing a hashtag "come to the street." And for those who don't know about that, these protests started because of the rise of public transportation fees in São Paulo, one of the Brazilian states. And then it became a national movement of discredit in political institutions. And 2 years later, we had the movements for the presidential impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, the president at that time. And Instagram has more than 100 million users, and WhatsApp has more than 170 million users in the country. That's a lot. And Brazilian citizens use those platforms 4 hours per day average. So that's why digital influencer is the profession of the millennium, at least for us. In contrast, when we take a look at the numbers of public access to institutional websites, and Alisson Queiroz is here, he knows a lot about that too, like the website of the National Congress, like Portal e Democracia, which is a portal for public engagement of the Chamber of Deputies, Portal e Cidadania from the Senate, or the regional parliaments, we have way fewer daily users than social media. If we get hundreds of users, it's a very nice and very particular day. So the institutions started to think that citizens expected at some point that they could come closer. And the best means seemed to be social media, especially because they were designed to allow information spread and interaction. Then governments and parliaments and legislatures started to create profiles on those media about 10 years ago to try to reconnect with the public, since the public is there, is clearly there, and those means could be interesting spaces for the development of public engagement. So I think that's a proper context that show us why social media could, not exactly does, but could facilitate public engagement in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm always amazed with the numbers in Brazil, and I know that I shouldn't be because I'm quite familiar with it and I've been there. And I know what, how thriving activity in social media is, but every time I get quite, amazed by it. Let's drill down a little bit more into it now, though. So we've got the context of the numbers and the scale of it, but now let's drill down in terms of the actual legislatures, the parliaments in Brazil. And if we, and now I'm turning to Thales, if that's okay. If we consider sort of the 5 types into which public engagement often gets divided, like it was divided in a global parliamentary report on public engagement, such as information, education, communication, consultation, participation. So from almost like increasing involvement of the citizen, really. What would you say are the main purposes social media is used in literatures in Brazil, Thales?
Okay, great question. First of all, I would like to thank you, Christina, and IPAM for the invitation and this opportunity to participate of this seminar. I really miss this kind of discussion to participate of that. So thank you very much. And so let's try to answer this question. But first of all, I would like just to say that we focus here, our database like that, it's just for the 26 state parliaments in Brazil. And then the 26 city councils in the capitals of the capitals, plus the federal district where Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, is located. So the total number is like 43 parliaments, just to say that, and then we'll say some data here, some information based in this database. So let's try to answer this question. Considering this, the 5 types of public engagement, the information is the first degree of the public engagement, and then it's the way that the social media, the institutional social media is most used. So it's like you can't say that, oh, they can have potential like to do more, but they try to focus more about the activities, parliamentary activities, to announce the transformation of projects or bills into laws after completing the legislative process. It's like they use that to say a kind of, this is now law. And then it's like to show the influence of the parliament in people's lives, for example. And then Cristiane Bernardes, she wrote a paper in 2020, and she interviewed, for example, managers of 4 legislative assemblies in the southeast of Brazil, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Espírito Santo, and Minas Gerais, for example. And then she said that this strategy, now this is now a law, for example, it's a common strategy. They use it a lot to call attention of the people, for example, of the citizens. They focus basically on showcasing services and illustrating how citizens' lives may be impacted by the new laws, for example. Try to provide means to the parliament's work. So what is the importance of the parliament, for example? So they use the information type typically for that, to say, oh, this decision, political decision may change your life because of that, your daily life. Another use of social media, like focus on the information type, is sharing and reposting news published on the parliament's website, for example. So this practice is frequent. So often they use all the time, like they put the hyperlink to their website, and then you can read all the news, for example, to understand more what was the decision, what happened, and things like that. And then it's like how can I say, this practice is so frequent and serves like a real-time disclosure, because it's easier for the people, for citizens, to get the information that on social media than to go to the website sometimes to try to search that. So it's a common strategy to share the information, the this information, this change, the decision using the social media, the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And they usually use the social media and also to encourage future interactions with citizens. Like information, how to communicate with the state parliament or the city council, including the contact numbers. You can call, talk with us with this number, telephone number. Like you can send your message using these proper forms, or even the parliamentary ombudsman. So they use that. Also, how to connect, how to send your message, how to talk with the parliament. So like I said before, so using social media, it seems like to be more friendly for individuals, for people, just to get the information that they need. So I think there is the common strategy that they use that. They have this impression, it's kind of thinking, and then they use a lot of that. So let's put the information that they need using the social media because it's friendly. It's like more informal sometimes. It's easier to get.
Yeah. So it's sort of more. So it's sort of more to put the focus on like breaking down the information almost, isn't it? So the information is on the website, but we put the spotlight here and sort of break it down into different parts. And are there any differences in how this parliament is using social media platforms in terms of the aims and promotion of public engagement, or is it they all use in the same way? You know, are there any differences between them?
No, there are some difference, like, and then I think I will talk that more later. But they put the information. There is the possibility of the use of the inbox too. They can send the inbox and the citizens, and then to respond directly the citizens. But at the same time, there is difficult to manage that, to answer, and then there is something that impacts like the offline structure, the human resource. So impacts a lot of that to use the social media too. So it's something that I think I would reflect later. But they also use the second most used like the education, because and then you use like to some campaigns like social campaigns, for example, the Yellow September about mental health, depression, policies about that. So here now, for example, in March, they use the social media about gender violence and policies about that. So there is, I think the first information is the first one, and the second one was the education, and then there is another thing to develop more, that is the consultation and participation too. That's something that need to focus more about that. And then there is a point, the iteration, like Paulo Oliveira and Massucchini, Alice, I don't know how to say her name, sorry. She published, I think last year, an article, a paper that showed that the lack of dialogue too. So for example, we had like the comments, only have some data here, for example, considering then the 10 last posts, for example, and the city councils, for example, they just one city council answer or commented a citizen post. So there is another thing that you need to develop more, like this dialogue, this communication too. I think I finished. I will say a lot.
Yeah, really interesting. You were talking and I was wondering whether they use at all things like whether the social media is actually a channel to galvanize participation. So for instance, the use of hashtags, which the UK Parliament committees use. They don't use it so much now, but at some point that they were using that. But anyway, that wasn't going to be my question. I want to move on because I know there's a lot to talk, but I'm looking at the time and there's still a lot I want to ask. So I'm going to move on and then see if we can come back to that. So I'm going back to Isabel now, if that's okay. Isabel, can you, so I know you've looked at different layers of parliaments, or you've been researching this for quite a long time. Can you see any differences between sort of national or subnational level? Because quite often there's this thinking that the more the parliament is at subnational local level, the closer they are to the citizens, and there's more of a connection, so that might lead to differences. But have you noticed any differences in those patterns?
Yeah, sure. There are some differences because of national legislatures face more challenges, I mean, in the use of social media, because the size and the diversity of the population they have to attend, the size of administrative structures, and that's, I think, it's the big issue, the biggest issue, and the relationship between the institution and their constituencies, because the constituency. What I have found about the national houses, I have a PhD research about public engagement in the Chamber of Deputies. So I can say that they have many profiles on social media, almost one for each of the most important sector. So that's a problem because it kind of pulverizes the audience attention, and that could be a problem. It has been a problem actually for engaging people. Plus, I've also found during this research that the sectors barely talk to each other. For example, at that time, I saw in local that the communications department of the Chamber of Deputies were not really updated about what the team at the hacker lab of the Chamber of Deputies was doing. So, and when the communications department was aware of what Hacker Lab was doing, this department publicized their actions in a programmed post, which is okay. There's no problem in programming posts on the official profiles, but they said they made that sometimes in the middle of the night. So that's a problem when the Hacker Lab was doing a public engagement activity. It was a launch of a public engagement activity that was happening in 2017. On the other hand, we should not say that the department, the communications department, deliberately ignores the actions of other sectors. The team that manages social media is so reduced that they cannot handle so much work. So that's why the Hacker Lab has its own profile on social media, which receives very few likes, comments, and reposts from the public. So that's normal if the institution has several profiles and few planning on how to manage them to achieve the public attention. And I think it demands, to have this attention, it demands consistency and knowledge of social media affordances, and sometimes it lacks. And in the regional assemblies, we can also see some challenges concerning the use of social media, of course, like the reduced number of consultants to manage those platforms. But what's different is that they do not have several profiles. I think because of that reduced team, they reduce the effort. So they concentrate mostly in one profile for each social media, the official profile of the Legislative Assembly. So we observed that it was easier for those teams to have a consistency and to plan the use of the media. One of the exceptions is the Assembly of Minas Gerais, which is a different case from all the other assemblies, because it has a long history of digitization of activities. So they have other profiles. One of them, which is a very good profile, is from the legislative school that they have. And sometimes they engage more people than the central profile, because they are very active, and the team demonstrates a bit more knowledge on the dynamics of social media and their affordances, which is very important to what I said before, consistency, and to keep going this public engagement through social media. And the city councils we have, they are very different because they are very heterogeneous. And mentioning this work of Paulo Oliveira, who is a PhD researcher of our group based in Paraná, in the south region of Brazil, she found that social media use is even more concentrated mostly in one person. So we have one consultant to make not only social media, but everything about the Department of Communication. So there's a lot of work, and especially during the pandemic, when most city councils had to broadcast for the first time their meetings, and this one-person team should be responsible for the whole process filming, broadcasting, managing the platforms, and everything else about communications. So in other contexts, because most councils only sit few times in a month, and Lido sits only once a month, those professionals could plan better the content of the month, the content that go to social media, and program some posts, and that's the easy part. However, they pointed that they said to Paulo Oliveira in interviews that they sometimes fear the production of content to social media. That's a challenge because there are a lot of party interests, and since everyone knows, councillors and citizens know who the person responsible for the media is, they suffer a lot of pressure from all those actors, especially in city councils in the countryside. And that's a particularity of those councils, of those legislatures.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That reminds me so much of some research I did a few years ago, and the importance of the offline structures, as you mentioned there. And how you can't really understand the way parliaments use social media without understanding the structures behind it. So I'm coming to Thales now and wondering if we could do a bit more of a reflection on that. Thales, from the research, what have you found about the importance of the way parliaments are organized and staffed and in shaping the way parliaments use social media?
Okay. To answer this question, Christina, I will mention your classic paper that you published, I think, 2007, that you try to understand the factors that would affect the parliaments to use the internet or not. And then I will adapt and just to say about the social media. And then, but it's almost the same. Like Isabella also highlighted pointed some aspects earlier. And then I think the first one is like the organization culture, like, and then the institutional development, like the integration between sectors is really important. And this is decision-making process. What is the role and the function, how you use the social media or not? So you need to clarify these kind of things, like this definition for what, which reasons. And the second one is like institutional resource, human resource, financial resource. Like Cristiane Bernardes, she focused on the Facebook, like I said before, the 4 state parliaments of the southeast of Brazil. So there are, and then she showed that there were no servants exclusively to manage the social media like that. Maybe they're just one servant and 2 interns like that to manage, to post, to publish, to monitor the social media. So it's hard that only the Legislative Assembly of Minas Gerais is a typical case that there is a specific department for that. But at the same time, there is this the political will too, because every time that the director office of the bureau change, even the speakers, for example, maybe the servants can change of the department to the director of the communication, digital communication, they can change a lot. They can change or not. So this is the third aspect, that is the political will. And then the political will involves political decision, for example. So we would invest or not for a software to monitor the posts or not. So this is a decision that involves the political actors, political decision. We will sponsor or not a post to reach out countryside, not countryside, but other citizens far away from the capital or not. It's considered the state parliament, for example. So this need money, investment, so it's political decision too. And the 40 questions, the 40 aspects, sorry, is this citizen participation. So it's difficult for, you have pointed out, like to how to post, you need to be neutral, non-partisan, and then people sometimes in citizen needs prefer to go to the political actors, social media, they need to prefer to interact with them. And then it's hard, for example, for social institutional media to interact with people, to post or not. For example, just to reflect that Thiago, our intern of the research group, he said in our last meeting, I don't know if everyone knows about what happened in the 18th of January here in Brazil last year. And then there's some Bolsonaro supporters, some groups invaded the Chamber of Deputies, House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and broken everything. And then sometimes it's better, not better, but easier, and then to avoid some conflicts, social media to post about the painting, the sculptures that had broken, than to post about political risks and the risk for democracy, that this event may affect in Brazil, for example. So that's maybe sometimes easier, and then to avoid some political conflicts for the public servants to post that, focus on the painting, focus on the symbolic representation, than to say about the democracy, like that, institutional process and things like that, political institutional. So I think I will point these 4 factors that affect.
Yeah, it's one of the key challenges, isn't it, for parliaments because obviously officials from a parliament have to be neutral at all points, have to be apolitical, and that's always difficult to do. Well, it's sort of easy to do, but not necessarily to talk about politics and engage people. That's the issue, isn't it? And with social media, it becomes even more difficult because that's even more of an informal environment where there's even more discussion. So some of what you identify there sort of shows that, it sort of really brings that to the fore. I'm going to finish now with the last question, if that's okay. And please, anyone, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat, or after we finish this in conversation, you can come in and ask your own question if you want to. And I'm going back to Isabel, if that's okay, and finish on challenges, if that's okay. So we talked a little bit already about this challenge of transmitting information, but doing it in such a way that it's neutral and then trying to engage at the same time. And of course, in Brazil, we have had, not just in Brazil, we've seen that elsewhere too, highly personalized politics, and very often factionalized politics, very often polarized politics. Can you say a little bit about the challenges that these parliaments face in the use of social media in that context of highly personalized politics? In some ways, you could say, just don't go to that space, just don't be there. On the other hand, that's where everyone is. So yeah, can you say a little bit more about those challenges, and then we'll open up for Q&A to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Christina, for the question. We were talking a little about this before we started this In Conversation seminar and the backstage here. And because of this personalization, our representatives nowadays use social media better than the legislative institutions. That's a matter of fact. So the challenge of parliaments and legislature is not trying to compete with their members, because these ones have several advantages over the institutions. I think the first one is that the Brazilian model of public service reduces the flexibility of contracts and kind of retards modernization, because parliament officials enter the service through a public selection, and if they succeed, they have a stable public position. But we don't have lots of public selection processes. It's not every time that it happens. We spent almost 10 years without a public selection for the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate and some regional assemblies. So it means that those people at some point become less updated about social advances like the development and use of digital technologies. I think Christina says all the time that Parliament is many steps behind the digital innovation. So it's a challenge for the parliaments. On the contrary, representatives can hire teams easily, teams that have specific and modern expertise that can provide more innovation in the way they engage with the constituency, which happens all the time. So they don't need to anymore to dispute the cover page of institutional websites or social media of the institutions, because they can engage people directly with their content, and they can be partisan. They can take a side. On the contrary, as Tali said, the parliament officials cannot do that. And they can work also accordingly to the algorithmic logic of each platform. so they can achieve more visibility for the representatives. So there are many, many things that compose these. So in this sense, to develop effective strategies for what you call, Christina, institutional representation, could be focusing on institutional actions to engage people, but also investing on something that representatives cannot do by themselves, opening opportunities for the public to participate in the decision-making process, which we found that's lacking in social media institutional use, as Tali said. Consultation and participation are not functions that are really developed concerning public engagement on social media. But it should also come with a deep discussion, not only a superficial proposal, but a deep discussion on how to develop efficient initiatives, not only providing superficial service that happens all the time, and because it won't give people the feeling of being really heard. So I think these are my reflections on this.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Very good reflections, my view. And I think we might come back to some of those points. There's actually already a question in the chat by Rodolfo. Rodolfo actually works in the Chamber of Deputies, you know him, and is behind many of the initiatives, digital engagement initiatives of the Chamber of Deputies. And Rodolfo, do you want me to read your question, or did you want to ask your question? You're very welcome to ask your question.
Thank you very much.
That's better.
Well, I can ask it, no problem.
Thank you.
So my question is directed to Isabel, and thank you. Your presentation was very good, you and Thales. You said that many users engage via social media, but few users engage via Parliament's own tools. Is there any reason for that? How to bring more users to Parliament's own platform, and finally, is that desirable? Thank you.
I like the last question, Rodolfo. Is that desirable? Because, yeah, my view on that would be, it depends what for. But let's see what Isabel is going to say.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree. I completely agree. Yes, to answer to you, Rodolfo, thank you for the question. I saw your presentation once about the deliberative systems, digital systems for deliberation in Brazil. It was fantastic. Well, I'll take you back to my master's thesis, when I studied the first time when the portal E-Democracia, that's a portal for public engagement specific from the Chamber of Deputies in Brazil, offered for the first time the discussion about the budget laws in the country, the national budget laws. So there was a lot of participation. People were participating, and after that, there was a discussion on the political reform in Brazil, also in Portal E-Democracia. And people were going to this discussion. In 2012 and 2013, it was a boom of participation through the Portal E-Democracia, as I can remember. But after the process, people were complaining on the comments in there that they were not heard. So that's the point. So it complements what I was talking. Sometimes people go when it's when that's new, when we have a new initiative, when we have a new appeal, when we bring some good questions, some good points which are in the discussion into the parliament. So people are interested to go to those platforms, but they need to be heard. They need to feel that they have been heard in this process. So if they are not, they prefer not to log in with their national identification number, which we call CPF, in a platform and in an institutional platform, not to be heard. So they go to social media, so there they can complain, they can say anything. They are not being kind of surveilled by the institution. So that's why I think they participate more through social media than through institutional media. Sometimes they go, but we need a good a good motivation for them to go to institutional platforms and not staying in the superficial discussion and sometimes the polarized discussion, the discussion that leads to some argues in social media. So that's the point. It's not every time. I won't do an evaluation, Christina said, about if it's good, if it's not good. I think I am some of the academics that support the attraction of people to institutional platforms because it's easier for the parliament and the officials to work on that. But when the parliament does not do this, does not provide those initiatives, then people prefer to stay where they already are without any efforts on social media. That's the case of Brazil, I think.
Can I ask a supplementary question to that? So it goes towards what Rodolfo was asking. So you mentioned there that to participate on the e-democracy or Cidadania or many of these systems, you need to register in there with your national citizen number, which I know is very dear to Brazilians, that you have to use that for almost all systems. And there's many other parliaments that do the same. They ask for people to register, and in countries where there's the same national citizen card, they ask to record with that. And then you have systems like the UK e-petition system, where you don't need to do any of that. You don't need to register. You just go in and submit a petition or sign. That's it. From me, and I'll go to Thales first now, if that's okay, and then Isabel, you can give your views also. And of course, it's a balance, isn't it? Because if you get people to register, you get the information, you know who they are. On the other hand, that might hamper participation. Where do you stand on that? Do you think it's important to ask for that registration, or do you think it's not? Yeah, where do you stand on that? Thales first.
No, it's a hard question because it's a traditional trade-off. I like that, ask or not, because sometimes it's easier for you to monitor that, to follow, to understand more the profile of the citizens who participate or not, if they are, and then maybe to engage other citizens, not the traditional, not the group of interest, social movements that is all the time participating or not. There is a challenge in that all the time. For example, we are here in Minas Gerais, the Legislative Assembly of Minas Gerais, all the time the servants point that you need to reach all the citizens, not all the same civil society. So it's hard because of that. But at the same time, if you don't ask like this identification, it's easier for the people to feel more comfortable, or even to send some complaints, for example, anonymous. She faced something that it's like, and then there are some risks for her or him to send this message, and then you ask like this identification. So it's complicated. Sometimes, for example, we are analyzing, for example, the ombudsman, for example, that the Legislative Assembly they have, the city councils have or not. And then I think this kind of thing, the ombudsman, that is specific more for the complainant, involves like human rights. So I think that's the need of identification is not a good idea, for example, because of that. You need to feel free to send something, because it's something really issues that it may cause problems for you if you identify or not. So some specific things, I think it's not necessary to identify. Anonymous is important. So I don't know how to manage that, what kind of discussion or not. But for example, specifically for ombudsman, I think that's the content. We content that. No, you don't need the identification because of that.
Isabel, what do you think on that? But also, are there any more questions? I don't see anyone. So if you want to ask a question, you could just click on reactions and then raise your hand, or you can type your question in the chat if you want to. And don't worry that if you don't want to read it, I'm very happy to read your question, so you don't have to come and read it yourself if you're a bit shy. Yeah, so Isabel, still on that, would you go, I mean, you're giving us great answers because it's based on your research, but you're doing what we academics do, which is showing the pros and the cons and trying to push you. If you had the power, if you're Alison or Rodolfo and had the power, it could change things, would you go for that registration, or would you leave it open? Then linked to that, my extra question there is, what would you do to encourage more of that participation in the institutional channels? Because you said earlier that you sort of support more participation in those channels. So what sort of things would you do?
Okay, let's think like an official. Well, yeah, I try all the time to think like an official, not only as an academic, because people say that we are very normative and we want them to do things that they cannot do because of the constraints of the institution. But I think I'm pro registration. I like this model, and I just think the parliament misses the opportunity of using this data to know more about the profile of people that go to institutional mechanisms, to institutional platforms. So they have this data. I have accessed some of them. I took a look when I was into the Chamber of Deputies doing my research. So I know they have analytics about that, and they could see how to attract people from other profiles. So if you have more men, middle-aged men participating in this, you could see how you can engage more women in the discussions. That's very important. And also, I think the context and the opportunities that are given matter. I mean, the topic that you are going to discuss, to put in discussion, is important to attract people there. And you can use, I think, to get people to those platforms, you can use social media to engage them. I think it's a very nice mechanism to attract people. So you generate, links to people come engage in this conversation, because, during our 2018 elections, there were some groups on WhatsApp for campaigning, and they were attracting people to Portal e Cidadania to engage in a discussion, in a vote about, what we call ideological topics that were highlighted during that campaign. So they could do this very efficiently. So Portal e Democracia passed from hundreds of thousands to millions of participation. So to millions of people, individuals participating, because they have to register. So I think that could be a good link. That could be something that I would do if I was an official, if I could have this opportunity.
Thank you. Alison Queiroz, by the way, says he feels like a superhero now. He's got the power.
Yes.
On that question, I think it's interesting you're saying about how the parliaments could use that data when people register. I mean, there's all sorts of issues about personal data, isn't there? And at least in Europe, that's a massive thing of how institutions use people's data. And it's one of the reasons why in the UK, for instance, there's no national identity card and that sort of thing. But just to reflect that in the UK Parliament, for instance, and I know we've got some people in the audience from the UK Parliament, so for e-petitions, you do not need to register, as I said before. You need to put your name and your email. Of course, you could make up your name if you wanted to, but you do need to put an email that you use to do a petition or to sign. But then what the committee does these days, which I think is a really good practice, is that they connect those people who have signed those petitions to other parliamentary business happening in Parliament. So if they signed a petition about, I don't know, cancer treatment, and the health committee is doing an inquiry on cancer, they might then send an email to the thousands of people who signed that petition about that committee inquiry of that, that health committee inquiry. So as you say, Isabel, is about utilizing that data to make the engagement more deep, to depth, to rather than just superficial. You mentioned the idea of superficial quite a few times, and there is that danger, isn't there? You do lots of things, but not necessarily leading to more deep engagement. And there's a great question in the chat by Claudia, and I'm going to read it, Claudia, unless you wanted to come in. By the way, we're having a lot of participation from people in Brazil. Anyone else from out there who wants to ask a question, you're not from Brazil, you'll have priority next. Claudia asks basically the issue of robots, of trolls, which we know can be a massive issue. So say, for instance, those institutional channels did become much more participative and start becoming much more visible. What is the danger that then they become overwhelmed by basically trolls, robots, whatever you want to call it? Isabel, do you want to go for that first?
Okay, yeah, nice point, Claudia, thank you. Yeah, I think that's why the institutions make the registration compulsory, because of this question, because of this point. We have this problem in Brazil, and especially after the elections of 2018. And as I said to you, it was, we had a very good campaign, good not in the evaluative point, but very effective. Yeah, a very effective campaign through WhatsApp, in which most of the population it's a platform that most of the Brazilian population uses. And we saw how it could go to social media and make this, create this opinion, opinion movements, and make people think about things that were not from a majority. I don't know if you understand what I say, but that's kind of it. But when we have the registration, that's why I'm for, because I think about the problems of the country. And we still have this problem with the trolls. And in these portals where we have a registration, people are more, they feel the constraints. They are not aggressive, they are not uncivil, they try to discuss or simply put their ideas without being, without offending people, without committing crimes, without doing anything very, very concerning. Otherwise, on social media, they do all of that when they can be anonymous and they can use those kind of profiles, robots. And I think what Claudia points out is that the Chamber of Deputies is for the registration because we fear, the officials there fear this, and especially the political actors fear that. Nowadays, the discussion, the most important discussion in the country is in the Chamber of Deputies is deepfakes, video deepfakes. So that's the point. We are discussing the regulation of platforms because we have been problems, attacks against democracy through those media. So I think that's an important question. And I forgot the last part of your question, sorry.
Yeah, I think you've answered really. It's about the dangers. If you get a lot of participation, then, you know, is there a danger that, and you say you require registration, but I mean, with artificial intelligence developments, it probably won't be very far from those registrations to be done automatically, and more complicated. But I think you've addressed that. And there's no other questions coming in, so I'm going just to close to ask you both in terms of looking ahead, moving forward, and I'll start with you, Thales. If there was one recommendation you take from the research to these parliaments, what would that be? Just one recommendation that you'd like to see these parliaments implement. What would that be? And then I'll come to Isabel.
No, it's hard, one recommendation, because it's like one goal in research. You have many things to do before that. But I think like we discussed it in our last meeting, Isabella, and then she pointed, sorry, Isabella, but I will say your idea. I think one great good strategy is like, for example, and then fostering more the education, public engagement, is to interview some specialists, some professors, some people, then use this capital to try to engage of these people, and the human capital, the social capital of them, try to engage for citizens to engage to the social media of the parliament. So, for example, try to and then make a research and then try to make some shorts of some videos, parts of the interview. And then I think it's a good, because people who likes this personality, then maybe will try to watch all the interview, or maybe to call attention for that. So I think it's a good strategy. And then Isabella pointed out in the last meeting, because of the legislative school of here, Minas Gerais, they are doing a lot of that, including with her, Isabelle. So she's cut some parts of the interview that she did, and then to post on the Instagram. So I think it's a good strategy, and then enforce more the educational purpose of the parliament.
What about you, Isabel?
Yeah, I have forgotten I said that. When Thales say our meeting is the meeting of our research group that we have every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. Yes, I agree with him. We were talking about that because it potentializes the visibility of a post.
Yeah.
So and it's connected to what I said, the affordances, knowing about the affordances of social media. For example, Instagram has now this possibility, this tool that you can share a post with some people, some other profiles. So you can achieve more likes and comments and reposts and visibility.
Yeah.
And that's really important. I would like only to point something that Thales said. Oh, Thales not, Alison said. I'm feeling like a superhero now. Yes. Kind of. I have to say we have a law. You mentioned something. We have a law on the rights of private data in Brazil. It's the LGPD, the Law of Protection of Personal Data. So, of course, if the institutions are following this, but I mean, they can use data internally, not the sensitive data, to direct these actions. And it's very nice that Alison said in the chat that the Saúde e Cidadania is doing that now, sending messages to people and increasing the participation through that portal. A kind of qualitative participation, not a quantitative only, because we had a quantitative participation in the increase of the participation in 2018. It was not necessarily very good. And connecting to what Rodolfo said, because when some politicians call to this kind of participation, they call with specific issues, with specific intentions. So they will call to the themes that are connected to their campaigns. So that's a problem. And that's why we have to find this model to engage people, but also to have a qualitative discussion on the issues that passes through. Also through that, people need to say that the parliament already has some directions for the discussion of some law, of some topic, because people think they are betrayed because they want something. They not. People that go participate in these platforms, that's not the whole population. That would not be the same result, for example, of a referendum and a national referendum. So I think that's the point we have to discuss here.
Yeah, very good. Well, we're coming to the end of our seminar, but I think that's a really good way of finishing, which is calling the attention to the depth of engagement and the quality of engagement, which I think quite often we forget about. So they always think about big numbers, reaching out to lots of people, but actually, if that engagement is very superficial, then maybe it doesn't lead to a lot of satisfaction or better democracy. And I think that's what your reflections, Isabel and Thales, showed us very, very clearly. So before I thank everyone, just to say that our next Public Engagement Hub seminar will be in May, 22nd of May, I think, and it'll be focused on citizen legislative initiatives and through a case study from Thailand. And Andy's just put the details that we have at the moment in the chat, and we'll soon have a web address for people to register on that, and we'll circulate that web address for everyone after this seminar. But that should be a really interesting one also, and from a part of the world we don't often hear about in terms of engagement. So I hope to see you all then. But before we go, just to say thank you everyone for attending, and say thank you to our interpreter for doing a great job. And of course, say thank you to our speakers, to Isabel and Thales. So can you please all join me in saying thank you to Isabel and Thales, however you do it, virtually, in person,
Thank you very much.
reactions,
Thank you
whatever it may
very
be.
much, Alex.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you on the
Thank
22nd of
you.
May. Thank you. Bye.